tiny little section like that out of a neighborhood. If you're surrounded with, for blocks and blocks of R1, and somebody says, oh, I have 2 acres, I can cram 20 units in the middle of my R1 if I get granted a PRD, I absolutely do not want to do that to this city. That's where my argument in the last meeting, that the minimum acreage is important to me, because I want it to be big enough, like a Sunset Villa, where it is its own kind of community. I'm okay with one of those in our city. I'm not okay if you put one little drive of townhomes in the middle of an R1. That's not fair to the people who bought an R1 thinking they live in an R1, and 2 R1s came up for sale and somebody threw apartments in there.
Okay, now what about, there's the land around Smiths, for instance, is a smaller area, but it is next to existing townhomes and commercial and industrial, but it falls below that, what is it, 5 acres that you're wanting? So I think that's that's an ideal place for something like this to exist, because it's similar to what already exists with Sunset Villas. It's next to commercial, it's next to industrial. It's the perfect spot for it, keeping it next to main arterials. It makes sense. You're going to have more foot traffic to those surrounding businesses, and they're going to be staying on the state roads.
I agree with everything you're saying, Corinne, but that's where we want this mixed use. We want this mixed use section that will cover that exact scenario. And I feel like I've seen that mixed use.
That exact question came up before, and we said, couldn't we get some kind of professional use? It had been designated for professional or for mixed use. I think those are the areas where that's appropriate, and not something that I'm ready to just go and go all the way to apartment complexes there.
So
the land still holds true for me. I want at least 8 acres.
Currently, the ordinance is at 5.
I know it is.
The proposed is to just do away with it, to have more flexibility. If we did,
we keep saying no, but it keeps coming back. Well, we're going to remove it. I'm saying I will not vote for it. That is an absolute deal breaker for my vote. If we remove the minimum acreage, I will never support one.
So for me, I don't necessarily agree that it has to be 5 or 8, but what I do agree with is we have to restrict where this goes, not only by arterial, but also by the land use around it. I think you need to be mindful of the R1, these people that bought, acre lots and they get an apartment complex next door. I think we need to at least have some limitations on it, such that there is a gradual, what would you call it, mitigation area that maybe there's R1 or R2 or 3 that flows into it. So we just don't have apartment complexes at random places in the city. Like 2000, I cannot see a 12-plex just being plopped right in the middle of 2000. It just doesn't fit to me.
Well,
what's the council's opinion?
Coming into this clearly late in the game, my feeling is, what is the perception of the city going to be? Because those main streets are where everyone drives. It's just like going down Antelope and you see Job Corps and all of Freeport Center, and you tend to get an idea about what kind of area you've entered by what you're surrounded with. I would hate to see all down 1700 be pockets of high density that doesn't tell a single bit about what we are as a community, and suggest that that's just to appease. I don't know who that appeases. I think it detracts a great deal from what we want our story to be. So I think we've got to at least, first of all, no rentals, and they need to be owner occupied if we're going with townhomes. But I also think we can't have our entire corridor be about high density.
Okay, I'm with Jordan more so in the fact that I don't know that there needs to be a minimum acreage. I just think there needs to be some guidelines on where it's at, because again, like Jordan said, I don't want one little project plopped down on this little spot next to the church that we've been talking about.
Right.
Here.
I agree with that.
Can I explore something
Yes.
on that? So, one question, how about if some of you are saying that this is okay, depending on where it's located and what it's located next to, let's try to define that a little further on what's okay and what's not. If they're adjacent to existing commercial, period, is that enough to say yes? And then on the other hand, if they're adjacent to R1, does that mean an automatic no? Or is it, if it's adjacent to R2, is it an automatic no? Or is it, if it's adjacent to R3? So at what point are we okay? At what point are we okay with this for those who are okay with it?
So main arterial, right? We're all good with that? And then
Well, I
if
don't
we're,
think Lisa is.
I'm not.
No,
but we
I
don't,
I'm not either.
but if we're gonna have this zone, we don't want them going through a neighborhood to get to a PRD. We want them to be on the state road so they don't wear out our roads. And then
And actually, some of these, go ahead, Corinne, sorry.
with West Davis Corridor coming through as well, we anticipate the traffic level to drop on Antelope. Because, for instance, when I go to work, I will never go down Antelope. I won't go down that anymore to get on the highway. I will be getting on West Davis Corridor. So my commute there just totally changed. So I'm just saying that keeping the traffic in those zones is better than putting it, if we're gonna have this tool at all, it's better than having it in the middle of a little neighborhood driving on a little road. That's why it needs to be next to the main arterial, I believe.
Yeah, I more go with the arterial than the zone it's next to. But at the same time, I tend to side with Dave on the fact that maybe that's where we need this mixed use component.
Now, that's the other thing too, is that because this mixed use doesn't really exist yet, maybe that's why we're having this hang up, because I feel like, okay, there's got to be a place for some of these things to exist, but where we don't have that zone at all, what does that mean? And how long will that take to create? And are we just reinventing the wheel for that?
Council, can I ask? Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah.
Jordan.
So for me, I think the major arterial will be covered by the mixed use, because that's where we're going to have commercials adjacent to high densities. And I'm okay with some of those as long as they are well done. But as for to answer Brody's question, for me, the adjacent property should automatically adjust the density. So if it's an R1, maybe next to it, all you can put is a duplex. If it's an R2, maybe it goes up to something higher. But in this RPC, I think the mixed use covers the major arterials, which will be our 12 and 16 plexes, because I think those are okay along Antelope for the reasons that we've talked about. And I want a place for my kids to live. And if that's a place that can help people progress up the housing ladder, I'm good with that. But I do think that we need to separate out the major arterials from these minor arterials and deal with them completely separately. And this RPC should at least consider the adjacent lots for the density that's allowed.
That
I'd
was
like to chime in on one other point.
on this.
As far as one of the other reasons that I really feel strongly about having a minimum acreage is there's a tipping point of when a development becomes strong enough to sustain something like an HOA. You can't have an HOA of two houses. You can't have an HOA or a management of an apartment or a ownership of townhome groups for two buildings. You really need to have at least enough of it that there's going to be some incentive to keep that up and keep it from becoming a slum. If you have a big enough development, and this is where, I say that 2 acres is not enough. If you don't have a bigger development, there is no management incentive. It's just too easy to walk away from it and leave everybody else holding the bag for the slum that was created.
Okay, so with that statement, then I want to have what your thoughts are then on this mixed use. If you can put in some apartments or such with a mixed use, what's the difference?
Well, mixed use, because there is always going to be an ownership group, that is something that has to happen. You can't be renting out professional space or even selling professional space and not have some ordinance to keep it up.
But
Professional space is different.
But not all mixed use is integrated into the same building. Most mixed use is adjacent to professional building. So it's not, usually you're not going to have most, like we just talked with the developer recently, explained that the mixed use that has the business on the ground floor and apartments above, most of those don't work unless you're in a university type community. So what's the difference with that in mind?
Well, the ones that you just described that you say nobody's doing are the ones that are being built in Layton right now, and the ones that have been described by our consultants that have come in. So everybody's saying mixed use is showing us the ones that are ground floor professional, upper level dwellings. So that's where I get that from. It's not like just pulled that out of the blue and said that's the only way this works.
Dave?
That's all anybody's shown us lately.
No, actually, I disagree. I believe that the developers have shown us a horizontal mixed use and not vertical mixed use. At least those are the ones that I've seen, especially the ones next to Antelope that we've talked to recently. And
We must be talking to different people then, because
I don't
the
know.
ones that
I've been doing a little bit of research, if it's all right if I chime in. So what Dave is saying about the amenities is true. So the more units you have, the more feasible it is to have amenities. Because,
Right.
you cut this, only so many slices in a pie, right? And so the more units, the better and bigger the amenities are. And with the developers that we've met, they've indicated that vertical mixed use there isn't high demand for that right now, and that it is going more towards a horizontal mixed use. Not saying that by vertical mixed use, I mean like retail on the first floor and then apartments above it, right? So that the retail on the first floor has been hard to lease out. It's awkward to get into the building sometimes, and the parking's not there, and so the demand for that is not as strong, but it can be incentivized. And so if we have a form in mind with that vertical mixed use, we can attain that. So I was thinking about the difference between townhomes and apartments, and I've lived in both. I've lived in apartments, townhome, and now a home. And if I may, I probably overgeneralize. With apartments, I would say that the amenities are more valued, at least at that stage of my life. When I was in a townhome, it wasn't quite as important for me because I was looking to start a family, so I view those townhomes as being more of the owner occupied. They could go into maybe some of those more infill because they're not as intense. The smaller sites would be better for townhomes because say we reserve the smaller lots strictly for this mixed use zone, the mixed use zone is going to have a higher density allowance than the townhomes. And so if these small lots are for the mixed use, then you're going to actually have more density next to these single families. So that's why I think the tapering would be better with the PRD townhome versus a mixed use apartment next to some of these single family developments, because the mixed use is probably going to, if we're allowing apartments, it's going to land somewhere between 25 and 30 units per acre. And then of course the PRD, we're maxing out at 16 units per acre. And even that's hard to attain, especially if we don't allow up to a sixplex. Without sixplex, if you're just strictly fourplex, you'd probably top out around 12 units per acre. Anyway, that's the research. These are all good points and things that I've been researching and thinking about too.
So are we discussing apartments or townhouses?
We're talking about townhouses, but
in this one.
yeah, in the past we've been talking about creating
Next.
a new mixed-use zone,
Which would be,
Apartments.
which would allow apartments as long as they provide some sort of office or retail along with it. But yeah, and that's actually going to be on the agenda. It's been requested to be on the agenda. To
So
start
so
talking
Noah,
about
does
that.
the draft PRD permit apartments?
No. Draft PRD is strictly townhomes.
Okay, I'm settling into a middle ground here because I do like I want the mixed use tool in our bag.
Yeah,
I don't want to put all our eggs in that basket because then what we're going to get is just what we've got with commercial. Way too much commercial, way too much mixed use, and we think everybody's going to get it. So along these arterials, and I'm thinking of Antelope specifically, I think there are some of these smaller lots that where a PRD like we're looking at here could work.
I don't have a problem with townhomes along the main street, especially if they're designed well and they aren't. I just lost my whole thing, just went away. There we go. Anyway, I can see if they're designed well with a kind of a master idea of what we want Syracuse, kind of like what we have at Station Park, where you have an idea of an old turn of the century feel.
like a theme.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And I can see that would be appealing, and it wouldn't look like they have just lined the corridor with encroaching apartments that feel like it's coming down on us. I think once you get into 3 stories, we're in trouble, because I've driven past all these places that I'm looking at. And particularly, I took a picture of one in Logan that I thought was 4 stories, and it turns out it was 3, and it was so imposing that it felt like it was coming down on us. So I hate to have Syracuse turn into, rather than a feeling of open and beautiful and family-centric, I can see it looking, if we go into several stories,
Are they,
I have a problem with that.
I was just gonna say, is the reason why they're looking though at 3 stories to make room for the garage underneath,
Mm-hmm.
because we want them to have garages.
But it looks like on this 2-story townhome, you've got a garage there, just like Stoker's.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that is one of the tools available
Yes, like
to
in
us
this one.
for planning is, I mean, you can regulate density a number of ways. You can regulate it by units per acre, lot size, but one of them is maximum height. And we can also put provisions on the maximum height that might be, because this analysis that we're talking about being next to R1 or R2 or whatever, that's really, we don't want a really tall building next to a poor little house that's going to be a shadow. So
Sure.
with the maximum height, we can require us. It's very common for zoning ordinances to have a stepped height allowance. So the closer you are to your neighbors, that it's a single family,
Down to
the
their
shorter
level.
it has to be. So it could be, 5 foot. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio, or 2-to-2, or 1-to-2. So
Could we add that to, would that
Absolutely.
be one of those things that could help us to clarify where this is
absolutely,
gonna
we can
fit
totally add that if
appropriately?
you want to.
I think it's probably a good plan.
So like, for example, if it's a 1-to-1 ratio, if you're 35 foot tall, 3-story, you'd have to be 35 feet away from the boundary. Or if you did a 1-to-2, 70 feet from the boundary. So they would be required to really step that down. So I've seen a 1-to-2 is pretty aggressive, but that could kind of accomplish what we're talking about.
But there's this issue where Jordan sounds like he doesn't want that right next to a house. Lisa doesn't want it next to
Well, I
a
was gonna
street.
say, if you're stepping and you've got a 3-story here and you have to come down by the time you get to a house, once again, you're right. That's exactly right. Your residential areas are gonna have a problem with it, and I'm gonna have a problem with it because that's my view of the city. And I don't think we should do a step. I think we have to say 2-story.
So if I may, can I draw? Sorry, Jordan, Dave. Or maybe you're lucky because you don't have to endure my drawing. But in urban design, you have So you have setbacks and max height. So in urban design, a common tool to use is, now I'm talking about when it's next to the street. So we're talking about Elisa's concern. You can have a maximum height on the street that once that height is reached, you have to step back, and you can tell them that. So it becomes like either a mezzanine or a rooftop garden or something, or like a little porch patio, before it steps up again. So right now, the maximum height in the zone is 30. We're talking about making it 35 to allow the 3-story, because that's, a big market demand. But if we didn't like that, we could say, after whatever, 25 feet, you have to step back at least 10 feet. So these are all within.
To give the perception of it being lower to begin with.
Yeah. So then when you're driving down the road in your terrible car.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm sure you'll be selling them like crazy.
So yeah, you have a field of vision, right? So if you're driving down New York City, if you notice, the first level of these buildings are very ornate. Mm-hmm. And as you get up, they're not ornate because there's a field of vision that you see.
That's
so they're putting their money where their mouth is. So for the maximum height, we could craft, say this is 30, and then if we want to give a bonus height of up to 40 if certain conditions are met, that's something I've been thinking about with this mixed use. Is of, okay, standard height is 30 feet, but if you allow the, say if you have first floor retail, we can incentivize them with the second floor or a third floor and say, okay, well, if you do first floor retail, now your maximum allowed height is 40 feet or something.
Now show me what happens on the other side where the residential is.
All right, so a residential, so say you got a little teeny tiny house over here, and we don't want it to be overshadowed,
because there's no 2-story houses out there.
Yeah. So you take the measurement, so say 1 to 2, right? So the measurement here, so this is 1 foot of horizontal distance, or sorry, vertical distance to 2 feet of horizontal, right? So you have a foot here. The marker's running out. 1 foot is required to have 2 foot here. Okay.
That's a tiny house.
2 foot. Yeah.
It's definitely not to scale.
Okay. So now that's 4 feet, right?
Definitely.
So that's something that we can look at.
So they can put a 30-foot high building 70 feet from the house. 60 feet.
60.
Yeah.
That's bad math.
What does Dave always say? Yeah. So if you're 30, now you have to be 60.
I wonder if I could ask a question of these two developers that are here who have interest in this. I'm a bit of a pragmatic person. And I know that we're looking at numbers and distances, and, we say 14, we say 16. But in the real world, when you get down to really what you can design and what you can develop, in the properties that you're looking at right now that you have interest in this thing, what are your current densities?
Well, so on Banbury and Antelope, the piece of property we have is about 9, close to 10 acres. And, we're hoping that we'd be around that 14, 15 units per acre for what we're trying to do. And that's with the clubhouse and amenities and stuff like that. Now, that's with, when we started down this process with the city, it was kind of like they were steering us away from Stoker Garden type townhomes because, for whatever reason, and they gave us ideas for what Jerry Preston had approved by CVS, that maybe this 3-story thing would be good. And so that's kind of what we had gone down. And so I don't know what it would look like, but I did, the last time you guys talked about this, and it kind of got brought up about the 4 units attached, I went back and I said, okay, what if I was to try to max out at 15, 16 units, but I don't think I could. It'd probably be more about 14. You know, could I get even that? Could I squeeze that many units of townhomes, owner-occupied townhomes in that? And with 4 units attached, you can't. I think what was said earlier is pretty correct, that you're probably maxing out about 12 if you only do 4 units attached. And so I would think that there might be another tool the council could use to allow, because I know you look at those, and I have some pictures here of units that are, you know, more than just 4. And there's some architectural things that you put on there. Maybe if you're on the upper end of, you know, 12 to 14, 15 units per acre, that the council can approve more than 4 on, you know, some sort of a condition that the undulation on the architectural things would allow for that to look proper, and it would be kind of up to the council at that point. And then anything less than, you know, 10 units an acre or something, that maybe the 4 units attached is max is totally appropriate. I don't know, but for me, that's kind of where I was at on that. So I would hope that maybe, because I don't think you could ever obtain the higher, you know, 14 units per acre with the 4 units attached max. The open space would be in between the buildings, the common space would be, and rather than have it where people could actually enjoy it.
And in the,
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
Mr. Mayor, when you recognize somebody else in the room, could you identify who it is so we
Yes.
know who's speaking?
yes, sorry, that's Mayor Eric Craythorne.
Okay,
Mike, you want to respond? This is Mike Bastian.
So, and ours is a different product. The piece of property that we've been looking at and working on, we want to emulate something similar to Stoker Gardens as far as density. Everybody has a feel for what that product looks and feels like. I think there's some great things in here that have been prepared on how to make them not look all so as one unit, you could say, with the roof lines varying to give them individuality. So they're 2 different types of products. And again, what Eric talked about with going from having the ability to mix in some 6 units to 4 units, even trying to do 12 units per acre, you have a hard time even hitting that. Like I'm around 10 point something to 11 units per acre when I just do my math and look at it, meeting the common space requirements and those things. So these numbers sound high, but they really aren't going to be hit all that often. So.
and if I could add too on what they're saying, from a planning perspective, we don't want these just plain long facades. And so that's why I've added this language in here that talks about that horizontal roof lines from a public street shall feature breaks or variation of a minimum every 30 feet. So we want the gables and the vertical offsets in the ridge line. And then we don't want duplicating building facades, you know, every third building. You know how you've seen them all, where it just cloned all the way down for a quarter mile. So we're thinking about that. You know, with these architecture things, I'm not thinking gold doorknobs or anything, but I want to have like some basic things that just, we don't have any of those protections in our ordinance right now. So that's the purpose of those.
That's interesting that at the 4 units per acre, you can't,
Or for
or sorry, for
like
attached.
6.
Yeah.
You're probably only gonna get 10 units on that. So you need to be at least 5 or 6 in order to meet
Yeah. And
the 12 to 14.
I think it would be a mixture of 4, 5, and 6 is
absolutely.
the maximum of
Right.
6 to do it. Because like I said, if you go 4 consistently, 4 all the way across throughout the project, all your common space is going to be in between
Used
the
up in
buildings.
between. So
Yeah, not
you have
usable.
these little unused alleyways in between that really rob the rest of the common use area.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
So that means that we need to consider common use area, and if we put a couple more on there, then it makes the whole product better.
Yeah, each building has to be 16 feet apart. So
Right. You use up quite a bit of space in between when you cut down each.
yeah,
And, you know, choosing 4 between 4 versus 5 versus 6 is kind of a random, you know, guessing game on that, so.
And in our case studies, some of them are like 10 units attached. I don't think we want to go that far,
No,
but even 6 is, trying to find a good compromise, a good sweet spot so that it's not too long of a run of attached.
right. Well, I think that, we've talked before about going to 4, but if you're just wasting space in between that could actually be better used with a better amenity, better open space, then the 6 makes a lot more sense to make a good product.
I agree.
Council, can I, Dave, you brought up an interesting point, and I think maybe we ought to see where the council feels about it. You feel that the minimum size should not be struck from the ordinance. Do all of you feel that way? Where are we with that piece?
I can't go without minimum. There's got to be a minimum.
How do the rest of you feel?
I'm okay with the minimum, but for me, it's probably lower than, I know it's lower than what Dave's saying.
Dave wants 8,
Yeah,
and right now it's 5.
I would go down to at least 2, but I'm not sure if there's not other properties even below 2 that this might work.
Exactly. That's the thing, is that if you're gonna put in nice amenities, they're probably not gonna be looking to put it on.
Okay, so
3.
we talked before about the different products, and where I say 8 is a minimum is for detached housing. I'm willing to just leave it with 5 if we're going to accept some attached housing. But based on the things that have been detached housing, then I think 8 is appropriate.
I tend to agree with that. And I think the issue is what amenities can be added to a development by attaching them, saving and sharing the common space with each other.
I'm accepting of that. That makes, we talked about in the example that we have across the street, when they made detached homes and the struggle they had to fit into 5 and some of the compromises that they chose because of that, that's what I'm trying to get away from.
So detached houses at 8, but attached housing, which is what we're discussing really, which is townhomes or.
It can stay at 5.
Yeah.
We have to make that distinction in the ordinance if we're going to make a change.
I just think 5's quite high. 5 is still a pretty good sized chunk of land.
I'm just trying to look at these places, and for instance, off of 2000, would we rather have townhomes on that 3-acre lot, or would we rather have apartments? Because it is next to an arterial and already next to existing townhomes and existing commercial on that 3-acre plot. So what do you do there? I mean, you have to consider
1,000,
that.
did you say, or 2,000? That's
Sorry, it's 1,000.
Yeah,
It's
so that's by
1,000.
Smith. So right now, that's next to Sunset Farms.
Right. And behind commercial on a main arterial. And so it's already next to townhomes. So we
be
need to
careful
look
about
at that.
or doing this just based on one development.
Well,
Because on that
I
particular
agree.
one,
But I'm just
we
saying,
just-
do we want to consider that if we don't do townhomes, are we considering apartments for that instead with the mixed use? What do you want there? That's the question I'm posing.
Well, if you're asking me, I still think professional use or mixed use is better on that land, but that's not. I mean, right now it's zoned for commercial or professional. I think it was business park right now. I'm okay with that.
What is it currently zoned? Does anybody know on that 3-acre?
General commercial.
Is it?
Current zone is.
And I'm okay with that.
Actually.
Oh, actually, the general is
General plan is commercial.
agriculture
A1
Oh.
ag right now
Yeah, it's.
for zoning.
for zoning right now is what it's currently zoned for our future general
General
planning,
plan, general commercial.
general commercial.
So just because there are all of these spots that could be apartments, are we talking about that they all have to be filled with,
No.
with townhouses or
No.
condos? Or can they be, like, as someone comes to us and says, I'd like to build a commercial building here, we can say yay or nay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can
And
always say no.
And it's just a matter of considering in these areas, because they're along that main arterial with the hubs that we want to have our higher density at, do we want townhomes? Do we want apartments? What do we want? That's,
And
you know.
okay, here's another one, this 4.6 between Walmart and the theater.
Yeah,
You know, what fits there if we put a limit of 5? This has to be, you know, a minimum of 5.
Commercial. That's gonna be the main, we keep talking about once West Davis comes in, that's going to be the focal point of our retail. It's going to be between West Davis and Walmart.
I believe
Yeah,
it'll end up being more at 3,000.
That's a general plan discussion, not a creation of this zone discussion. I'm just trying to look at,
Right.
I'm just trying to look at all the different plots of land that
Right,
might exist in our, and be islands.
yes.
Let's see if we can give some direction to Noah, and then I'm gonna call this discussion at 8:30 because we have some other issues we need to discuss. We'll need to have a closed session this evening, council. I think if we could give Noah some idea of how you all feel about the limit, the minimum space,
Minimum
And
acreage.
minimum acreage, yeah.
Well, I believe that with an apartment living, that's when you really want the nicer, bigger amenities, because that's where you'd congregate as a single person instead of with a family, where, you know, when you become, I don't know. Anyway.
That's where you meet the hot babes by the pool.
Yeah, I mean, or you're going to school and you need some place to de-stress. I don't know. Rather than necessarily thinking that you need a huge area. I mean, both of them are going to need nice amenities, but it's just how much do we want to have with apartments or townhomes?
David, would you go back to the argument that you made about 1.8 and 1.5?
So my thought was that if it's detached homes, it needs to be a minimum of 8 acres. If it's attached homes, a minimum of 5.
Would you be okay with 4?
Maybe in a particular setting, but I mean, in general, if we're trying to write an ordinance,
That's what I mean.
I don't know of a 4 that works. I know that when we had a 4.7, it didn't work. When Doug's talking about a 4.6, I don't want to make that one because right there is where we believe is going to be commercial. So I don't want to write it for that, but I guess if I had an example, maybe.
No.
If I could say something about, so all of this analysis that we're talking about is all important things that we run through when making a decision for a zone change.
Mm-hmm.
So, and each property is different, and each property has its unique characteristics. So we can work really hard to codify an exact process for when PRD can be approved.
Right.
Which I'm happy to attempt to try to get those parameters. But like I said, each property is unique, and you have that legislative power. So when you do have an application, you can run all of those scenarios through your head when making a decision.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't giving that leeway, that doesn't, I mean, say we do codify the exact process for when we want PRDs and how and what and everything. If we're doing that because we fear what a future council might do, they might just get in council and just delete it all out of the ordinance anyway.
Yeah.
It's so
And just
true.
do what they want to do.
Like a new
So,
president.
yeah, so you can, I mean, I'm happy to try to write that parameter, but the reason why I was encouraging us to just remove the minimum acreage, because as we've looked at our case studies, there are many projects that are less than 5 acres. And I'm trusting in you guys' good judgment. So when we do get an application and it doesn't look appropriate,
Right.
that you just say no.
Right.
And we can try to create the perfect mousetrap here, but I just see that as a challenge.
And really, I just would worry about if we say, okay, all the smaller lots have to have apartments with a mixed use. Like, what's wrong with some townhomes is I really feel in
You can
those
always say
small
no.
areas.
I
Yeah,
mean,
we can say no.
Say it comes on and
Okay.
it's, and it, just because, and even if it is 8 acres, you can say no, or if it's 1 acre, you can say no or yes. It just gives you more power to decide what is appropriate for the community.
Jordan, how do you feel about removing the restriction on acreage?
Aloha.
Give me 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was on mute for a second. I gave you all sorts of beautiful advice. Wish you would have listened to it.
You were on mute.
No, for me, it's not so much about the minimum acreage, but it's about what's adjacent to it. Stepping sounds like a path to get there, but at some point, I still don't want a 4-story building right next to a single-story home, even if it's 80 feet away.
So I'm hearing you say that.
But
I'm hearing you. I want to just make sure I understand what you're saying. I'm hearing you saying that minimum acreage isn't as big as issue to you, but pragmatically speaking, what's it against?
yeah,
What's it next to?
so I think
What's it next to?
density is directly proportional to the house sitting right next to it.
Okay.
Or inversely proportional, I guess I should say.
Lisa, how do you feel?
I feel I don't care if there's a minimum. I think that just as we've said, each area is its own animal, and we have to look at it for whatever value we feel it has. So if we were to just say, well, everything that's over this amount will be housing, then I can see it turning into a concrete jungle, and which is what I don't want for Syracuse.
All right, but one thing I do want to state is that with increased density does come all of the rules that Dave has alluded to, that as we get a higher density, it needs to start adding those types of things that allow it to stay nice. So
Yeah.
if you're going to do a high density, the acreage size goes up. If it's a very low density, like a duplex, I'm good with that right next to a home.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need a minimum lot size.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start getting into these 16 units, then I think that does start to increase the density. So I think it needs to be a stepped minimum.
So maybe the height.
There's not a one size fits all here. But yeah, for a 16, I do think you need to start getting some minimum acreage limitations such that we can get a good product that stays nice, because there is enough of enough things around it to create that HOA type organization.
But then it comes back to our own discretion once somebody approaches us with a plan where we can say yay or nay, depending on what they're offering and and we haven't put a stipulation on size so much as we've said, you have to have all of these boxes checked. So then we're talking about, I guess I'm just saying, I don't think that there needs to be a regulation right now on lot size, because that does bind a lot of hands. But I think then what they have to do is bring to us their suggestion and their development idea,
When you
and
said
we say yay or no.
lot size, you're talking about acreage, right?
Acreage, yes, minimum acreage.
But for me, what happens when you do that is it becomes highly subjective based on how I'm feeling that day. Whereas if we write it down and codify it, suddenly now it's applied the same way across the board. And so I'm in favor of writing down as much as we can so that it applies equally to all people applying for that use. So that, every time someone says, I want to do a 16-plex, I say, okay, but with a 16-plex, it comes with these restrictions, i.e. you have to have a larger lot size, you have to have the stepping from the adjacent properties, and so that I get the same type of product throughout the city.
Noah?
Rather than a hodgepodge based on what I ate that day or how I was feeling.
If I can summarize what I think I'm hearing is that you all would like me to work on some limiting height restrictions based off of context, and possibly height categories based off of the units per acre, possibly. So the lower the units per acre allowed,
Or
To lower
possibly,
height.
like he was talking about before, what's the neighboring density? For instance, if it's next to an R1, they have a height restriction for that. What's if it's next to an R2?
they might build a 35-foot tall house in a R1
It's true, because
just as much
there's,
as,
it's true.
or a
There's
1-story. There's no real control on those zones. Just because it's a certain zone doesn't mean the house will necessarily look a certain way.
It's true.
The project
Right,
acreage and the
but you can
height is
say
not correlated to
There has to
me.
be, there has to be some correlation to the adjacent building.
That's what's more
Yeah.
correlated.
And we could totally do that. And instead of property boundary, we can say from the height of the closest building.
That's definitely a way to approach it, because if you're next to massive tall houses, okay, fine, build a 2-story, no big deal. Even a 3 might be okay,
Yeah.
because you're next to a 2 already. I mean,
Yeah, I'm imagining a map
stepped.
and you measure from each of the surrounding businesses or buildings, whether they're businesses or homes or whatever, it's just a building's a building. And then, that the smaller the adjacent building, the lower that building the proposed building has to be instead of property line.
One thing I didn't hear anyone capture is that with a higher density, I do want minimum acreage to kind of follow Dave's point.
So you're saying
I
like,
do think there has to be some minimum for higher densities, so that, if you're doing a 16-plex, I want a higher acreage so that you can start building a community of that type.
I think you're gonna need a certain amount of acreage no matter what.
I
to
agree
get
with
that.
that concept, but it's almost, I think it's gonna self-regulate.
Yeah,
too.
just like they're explaining here,
Yeah.
that how many units they can fit into an area is gonna require X amount of land.
And if NOAA writes up something that says, these are the amenities that have to be here and these are the equations that we're dealing with, then it self-regulates.
What I hear, I'm going to call the discussion tonight, but what I have heard some unity in, with the exception of maybe you, Dave, is that we ought to have some discretion in acreage. And then Jordan's comment, it's more important what's around it, and how that looks and what the density is. So have you got enough information tonight that you could take a stab at some other language?
Yeah, I'll work on the height.
Hopefully,
And I'm okay with the 6 units attached.
yeah, that's definitely something I
It
believe
seems like,
is okay.
we may not have consensus, but there's enough of.
How about that we
Oh.
say that anything that's along the perimeter of these main corridors can't be taller than 2 stories? Even if you stepped back and got to 3 stories further in, so say we're going down 1700, I don't want encroaching buildings lining our streets. And I think if we say there's a minimum of 2 feet or a maximum of two stories, 2 feet tall, 2 stories along the frontage, and then maybe you can grow from there and step up from there. But I still it comes down to me, what are our citizens going to think about Syracuse? What's happening to it? Will there be a change in perception of this being the community we've always known? And will we look like we've just given into high density? I think townhomes are much more embraced.
Overall
Especially
height
owner.
would be more important would be better wording for me than stories.
I agree.
Sorry.
Because
Overall
there's some
height,
houses that are built pretty darn high.
Yeah, that's true. You can go with a 14-foot ceiling or 20-foot ceiling called
Exactly.
a story. Yeah, height
So you're
requirements.
saying maybe, like, for example, 0 to 10 feet from the road,
Has to
that
be-
zone
can only be this
is
much.
25 feet tall.
Yeah.
But
You
between
can step back from
10
there.
and 20, it can be
Mhm.
30.
And that to me is
So
just
push
having
the
an
taller buildings
overall
off a little
image
bit.
for our city.
Does that help you, Noah?
Interesting thought.
What was the minimum acreage?
I think the minimum
Discussion.
height right now is at 30 as it is.
Minimum acreage.
Correct.
We should be-
Noah?
Right now it says 30 is proposed to go to 35 because there's those 3-story
Right,
townhomes that are popular with the garage and stuff.
okay.
But just like your other
I do like-
numbers, I don't want to just be arbitrary with height.
I agree.
I'd like to see what it looks like.
Exactly, because just picking, this is our max, just because randomly out of the air, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I can measure some. Maybe I'll do that for,
Okay,
I'll do some research and I'll take our case studies and I'll tell you how tall each one of them are.
that'd be great.
That's helpful.
I
I
appreciate it.
also didn't like the idea of the stepping back. To Lisa's point, you know, we do want to make sure that we don't feel like there's buildings coming down on us, but I think that steps back after like 25, 30 feet as a compromise to that approach. So I could live with that as well.
Council, I'm going to call the discussion on that. You've got some more direction, Noah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Dave, we're talking about the amendment to the Syracuse City process for filling a vacancy. You're the one who asked this to be on the agenda. Would you like to lead the discussion there?
Yeah, actually, was it Paul that pointed out that if we all didn't agree on a single person, that we would have that problem? I had considered that none of us would vote for the same person even once, but I'm perfectly acceptable to add that little part that if nobody votes for, that we have to go back and find some consensus.
Or just leave it as it is. I mean,
No, I really think this is about being kind to people. Every time we've done this, there have been somebody or 2 people or 3 people who have had clear support from multiple people. And then we're trying to figure out how to round out the field with all the people who got 1 vote. And that's where I think that it's really not kind to those people to draw it out and to give them more scrutiny and talk about what this, that, or the other about why they fit or don't fit. The less that we have to talk about that, if we're already in agreement on certain people, then it's just more kind to not have to say more.
I agree with that. And noting that sentence there where it says 2 votes only if 2 or more candidates receive more than 1 vote. That's
Yeah, with that, I think it solves it.
But, okay, so going further than that, maybe this is too open, or maybe this is too much. But
Too kind?
maybe, but I'm just thinking in the last one, we all said Lisa in our vote. Why couldn't we have just said that's the end?
If we get a majority.
That's what I say.
Except for that, it does provide a way for people to finalize their decision.
And that's the other side of what I'm thinking is, I could have been convinced. That could have changed
Yeah.
my mind.
I think the reason that, you guys set your own rules because the state law doesn't provide
Right.
rules. And so you guys went through and developed a set of rules for this process because we've gone through it so many times. And there was kind of a focus on not selecting someone in the first round because people think that the decision has been made
Yes,
before.
good
And
point.
so
Yeah,
Good.
that's
I think
very
like
true.
the 2 rounds, that was the reason for 2 rounds.
And it helps to justify to the public, yes, this is appropriate. It
Plus-
really does.
Plus, I like
But I don't want to go through the motions with extra people if we don't have to. Because every time that we've tried to figure out who the extra 3rd or 4th candidate was, those people never really got any more support than they had to begin with. And it's just not really, I think it's just not kind.
I think adding the sentence is where we want to go.
So at least 2 people need to get 2 votes for that rule to work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, as at least 2 people get 2 votes, then that rule is in place. And then the math really dictates it. I mean, because if 2 people got 3 or 4 votes, then we have our candidates. And we just are deciding between those 2. If a whole bunch of people got 2 votes, then maybe we do have to go through more process. But if we just have a bunch of people who got 1 vote and a couple of clear winners or clear consensus, it's just not fair to drag them through it.
Jordan, I'd like to hear your feeling.
So I kind of talked about this when we brought this up in the email. So this sentence, I think, captures most of what I was thinking, but I do agree that there should be 2 rounds so that it's obvious that we didn't take someone beforehand, that we actually do read through all of the resumes and everything. So maybe the only adjustment you need to make is instead of saying unless no candidate, say unless 2 candidates, because you really want a runoff between the finals.
So long as.
So that everybody, what's that?
So long as 2 candidates, at least 2 candidates.
Yeah. And at that point, I think that gets us where we need to be. We don't want a 1 round and done, because that does provide a bad appearance. So
Yeah.
I agree that let's make that slight modification. Let's go with this.
Paul, have you heard enough? You good with that?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
I'll
let's
get
not
this.
use it, because nobody's getting quit.
Nobody's allowed to leave again.
Every time we say this, we say that nothing can happen, and then somebody blows it.
Okay, we have,
That means I'm gonna get hit by a truck and it'll be me.
yeah.
Maybe a drone and CES.
Okay. Thank you. Council, we're going to need to convene into a closed session, and I think our rules say that to participate, you have to be present.
You have to be there.
You have to be there. I think that's a
Yep.
good rule. So we'll say goodbye
That
to
is the rule,
They're not
Will-
and
sad.
it makes me a little nervous that you're gonna make a decision in closed session.
Oh.
Well, you can't make decisions.
we won't make any decision. In fact, what I'll do is
It's
I'll
informative.
talk to both of you and bring the issue up to you privately.
All votes have to be
Okay.
public, so don't worry.
And it's,
Okay,
okay.
all
So,
right,
Thanks, are we done?
we're done.
Goodbye and aloha.
Aloha.
bye.
Have a great time.
Hey, aloha.
Take a motion to go
Signing
into,
off.
motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
And we have a quorum present, so.
Sweet.
Closed door.
No, you in or out?
Land litigation. what are
Come
we
close,
talking about?
you get the door.
Talking about land acquisition.
Let me just make a break on the recording. Okay,
Good idea.
give me 1 second.
I want to hang out with the cool kids.